Picture this. London, at the turn of the 16th century. Disease stalks the city every summer. Plague, fever, and sudden death move through its streets without warning. 2 hours on horseback from the glittering chaos of Westminster stood Eltham Palace, set within 600 acres of hunting grounds and encircled by a massive moat nearly 100 feet across. To the outside world, this was where England's most precious assets lived away from danger, the royal children, heirs to the Tudor throne. To those who served inside its walls, Eltham was something else entirely. It was not merely a residence, it was a controlled enclosure, a quarantine disguised as luxury. Inside this carefully protected world, Tudor children begin to disappear. Edmund Tudor is dead by 16 months. 3 infants never draw a first breath. Another will later cough dark blood as his lungs collapse in adolescence. Eltham was designed to keep death out. What it became was a place where death learned to wait. The palace itself was breathtaking. Its great hall could seat 800 members of court beneath a soaring hammer-beam roof. The royal apartments were heavy with tapestries, polished wood, and gold. Everything about Eltham projected authority and permanence. Yet beneath that display of power lingered an unease that no ornament could conceal. The children of Henry VII, and later Henry VIII, were sent here as infants, sometimes only weeks old, to be raised far from their parents. Separation was normal for royal families. Eltham, however, was deliberately isolated, positioned exactly 2 miles from Greenwich Palace. It was close enough for physicians to reach quickly, yet distant enough to shield the children from the diseases that ravaged London. The logic seemed sound. Early 16th century London was lethal. Plague returned almost every summer. Sweating sickness could kill a healthy adult within a single day. Consumption destroyed lungs slowly, inevitably, by placing the royal nursery at Eltham, surrounded by open countryside and sealed behind water. The Tudors believed they had created a barrier against invisible killers, but isolation works in both directions. The moat kept dangers out, and trapped whatever slipped inside. The Tudor dynasty faced a brutal reality. Wealth could not conquer disease. Behind Eltham's walls, death showed no respect for crowns. Princes and princesses fell just as easily as the children of the poor, and as losses mounted, the rules governing the nursery became increasingly severe. Every servant entering the nursery was questioned relentlessly. Had they been to London? Had they visited anyone ill? Had they encountered fever, coughing, or the dreaded sweats? One wrong answer meant dismissal at the gate. During the summer months when disease surged through the capital, the royal heirs were barred from London entirely. Boys were banned from the nursery, believed too prone to infection. Animals, even beloved dogs, were strictly forbidden. The Tudors believed disease clung to fur, spreading unseen with every touch. The children grew up in a world stripped of risk and of warmth. Clean, silent, tightly controlled. This paranoia came directly from the king. Henry VIII would later become one of the most extreme hypochondriacs ever to wear a crown. His private chambers overflowed with remedies, ointments, and potions. He submitted to constant medical examinations, convinced death lurked everywhere. That terror shaped how his children lived. His fear was not imagined. Henry had watched his brother Arthur die suddenly at 15. He had seen his mother, Elizabeth of York, succumb to fever. Nobles around him dropped without warning. In Henry's mind, Eltham's cruelty was necessity. For a time, the system appeared to work. In the summer of 1499, the royal nursery seemed a triumph. The children looked healthy, energetic. That September, the scholar Erasmus arrived at Eltham, with his friend Thomas More, eager to meet the famed Tudor children. What he saw reassured him. The children were lively, flushed with health. 8-year-old Henry, the future king, greeted them confidently. His sisters Margaret and Mary played nearby. Among them was the youngest, Edmund Tudor, just 16 months old. Erasmus left convinced the nursery was exactly what it claimed to be, a sanctuary where England's future thrived. 9 months later, Edmund was dead. In June 1500, summer turned deadly. London became a festering wound as plague spread from street to street. The royal household acted quickly. The children were moved north to Hatfield House, farther from the city, deeper into the countryside. Eltham, despite its moat and protocols, was deemed too close to danger. It made no difference. Whatever reached Edmund did not need crowded streets. At Hatfield, the toddler fell ill, weakness overtook him. Fever burned through his small body. Physicians watched helplessly as he grew too weak even to cry. Within days, Edmund Tudor was gone. His parents were not there. Henry VII and Elizabeth of York were travelling when a messenger found them. Their youngest son, the child they had sent away for safety, had died far from them alone. The irony was merciless. In trying to protect him, they had ensured he died without them. The court handled the death quietly. There were no grand ceremonies, no public mourning. Royal children died often enough that spectacle suggested weakness. Edmund was buried with minimal record. A short life, reduced to a line in accounts. For Elizabeth of York, the loss cut deeper. She had buried children before, but Edmund had lived long enough to be known. He had smiled, reached for her. He was not an abstract hope, but a real child who simply ceased to exist. She was expected to continue. Queens did not pause for grief. Edmund's death was only the beginning. The system that claimed to protect Tudor children had revealed its truth. Eltham Palace was not a sanctuary. It was a beautifully furnished graveyard, and the darkness that entered its gates would not be satisfied with one child. 3 years passed after Edmund's death, but Elizabeth of York never truly recovered. Those closest to the Queen noticed a subtle change, a quietness that settled over her, a distance in her gaze even during moments meant for celebration. She had done her duty by marrying Henry VII. She had ended decades of civil war and united York and Lancaster, but duty demanded more. In early 1503, Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant again. She was 37 years old, an age already considered dangerous for childbirth in Tudor England. Her body had endured 6 previous pregnancies, each one carrying risks that modern medicine barely understands and Tudor medicine could not hope to manage. Still, she prepared herself. This child would be born at the Tower of London, in the same royal apartments where generations of queens had delivered heirs. On February 12, 1503, Candlemas, Elizabeth went into labour. She gave birth to a daughter named Catherine after Henry's mother. For a brief moment hope returned. The child lived. The Queen survived the delivery. Court prayers were offered in gratitude, but childbirth in the 16th century was never finished when the baby emerged. Within days, Elizabeth showed the unmistakable signs of childbed fever. Infection crept through her weakened body, invisible and unstoppable. Her temperature rose, strength drained from her hour by hour. Royal physicians applied the full arsenal of Tudor medicine, bloodletting, poultices, prayers, charms. Nothing slowed the disease. 9 days after giving birth on her 37th birthday, Elizabeth of York died in the Tower. She had survived the Wars of the Roses, navigated the dangerous birth of a new dynasty, buried children, and endured political instability. What killed her was the simple act of giving life. The same unseen forces that had taken Edmund now claimed his mother. Baby Catherine followed soon after. The infant survived only days. Her death was recorded briefly, almost dismissively. No ceremony, no public grief. Her tiny grave vanished into history. She existed only long enough to die. Henry VII was shattered. In a matter of days he lost his wife and newborn daughter. The royal nursery system, the moats, the isolation, the endless precautions had failed completely. When Henry VIII came to the throne, he did so with a clear purpose: to succeed where his father had failed, to fill England with heirs. His wife, Catherine of Aragon, seemed the perfect answer. Young, healthy, devout, and from a royal family known for producing large numbers of children, she embodied Tudor hopes for stability. The future appeared secure. It unravelled immediately. Catherine's first pregnancy ended in heartbreak. In 1510 she delivered a stillborn daughter. The loss was devastating, but not yet alarming. Such tragedies were common. Catherine conceived again quickly, and this time the pregnancy held. On New Year's Day 1511, at Richmond Palace, Catherine delivered a living son. England erupted in celebration. Church bells rang until their clappers broke. Bonfires burned through the night. Wine flowed from public fountains. Henry VIII staged a tournament at Westminster, jousting beneath armour emblazoned with the words, "Sir Loyal Heart." The prince was christened Henry and given the title Duke of Cornwall. For 52 days, optimism reigned. Then, without warning, the infant stopped breathing. On January 22, 1511, the young Prince Henry died. No cause was recorded. Modern historians suspect infection. perhaps introduced during the crowded christening ceremonies, perhaps lurking already within the nursery. The celebration collapsed into silence. The bells rang again, this time for a funeral. Catherine was devastated, but she remained pragmatic. She was 25 years old. There would be more children. Henry publicly shared that confidence. The prince had lived, which proved Catherine could produce living sons. The next one would survive. The pattern, however, had already begun. In September 1513, Catherine went into labour again. The pregnancy had seemed normal. The child moved. There were no warnings. When the baby was delivered, there was only silence. Venetian sources disagree on the details. Some suggest the child was stillborn, others that he lived briefly. The outcome was the same. Another son gone. Henry was away campaigning in France. He returned to find his second son already buried. There were no public celebrations to undo, no armour to put away. The loss was absorbed efficiently. Catherine would try again. In 1514, another pregnancy ended, almost immediately after birth. The records barely acknowledge the child's existence. No name, no ceremony. A brief struggle for life. Then nothing. The infant faded before England could even hope. By June 1515, Catherine delivered another son, fully formed, but still. The pregnancy had reached full term. Her body had done everything right. Somewhere in the final weeks, the child's heart had stopped. Catherine endured labour, knowing her baby was already dead. The pattern was undeniable. Catherine could conceive easily. She could carry pregnancies. She could not produce sons who survived. Only one child broke the cycle. In February 1516, Catherine gave birth to Princess Mary. The girl lived. She thrived. Proof that Catherine's body was not entirely broken. But Mary was not enough. Henry needed sons. England demanded them. Each loss carved deeper wounds into the marriage. Henry grew distant. Catherine grew desperate. And above everything loomed the question neither could answer. Why did Tudor children keep dying? After Princess Mary's birth, 3 fragile years passed. For the first time in a decade, Catherine of Aragon allowed herself a dangerous thought. Perhaps the cycle had ended. Mary was healthy, intelligent. She embodied everything a Tudor child was supposed to be. Maybe the earlier losses had been cruel chance. Maybe the curse had lifted. In early 1518, that hope returned in physical form. Catherine was pregnant again. She was 33 years old, entering what Tudor physicians already considered a perilous age for childbirth. This would be her 6th confirmed pregnancy. The pregnancy progressed well. By autumn she was nearly full term. Everything appeared normal. Then, on November 10, 1518, Catherine went into premature labour at Greenwich Palace. The urgency was immediate. Blood flowed where there should have been none. The midwives understood before the child was delivered that this birth would not end in celebration. When the infant finally emerged, it was a girl perfectly formed, lifeless. She had died inside Catherine's womb hours or days earlier. There was no christening, no public announcement, no name recorded in most official accounts. The proximity to survival made the loss unbearable. For Catherine, this was the breaking point. 7 years of marriage had produced 6 confirmed pregnancies. Of those, only Mary survived. One son lived 52 days. The others never truly lived at all. Catherine's body had become a place where royal hopes failed repeatedly. Whether by choice or physical exhaustion, she never carried another pregnancy to term. If there were later miscarriages, they passed quietly into obscurity. But before Henry shattered the church to pursue a new wife, one question demanded an answer. Why did Catherine's children keep dying? 5 centuries later, historians and medical experts still debate the cause. The truth is likely not singular, but cumulative, a convergence of biology, belief, and disastrous medical practice. Catherine was profoundly devout, even by 16th century standards. She fasted rigorously during religious observances, denying herself food at moments when her body required nourishment most. Pregnancy under such conditions likely produced severe nutritional deficiencies, yet fasting alone does not explain the pattern. Modern researchers have proposed a more sinister possibility: Kell blood group incompatibility. In this condition, a mother's immune system attacks subsequent pregnancies as foreign threats. The first child often survives because antibodies have not yet formed. Each following pregnancy faces increasing hostility as the immune response strengthens. Catherine's history aligns disturbingly well. Her early pregnancies resulted in stillbirth or brief survival. By her final pregnancies, her body may have been destroying fetuses before they could fully develop. Tudor physicians had no concept of blood types, antibodies, or immune reactions. To them, these deaths were inexplicable tragedies. Another factor lurked completely beyond Tudor understanding: bacterial infection. Listeriosis, caused by contaminated food or milk, leads to meningitis and pneumonia in newborns. Babies exposed in the womb may appear healthy at birth, and then collapse within hours or days. This could explain infants who lived briefly before dying without warning. Even babies who survived birth faced extraordinary risks. Tudor custom required royal infants to be handed immediately to wet nurses. They never received colostrum, the first milk rich in antibodies essential for immune development. Hygiene worsened everything. Midwives did not wash their hands between patients. Christening ceremonies exposed fragile newborns to hundreds of courtiers. Physicians believed fresh air was dangerous and sealed rooms tightly, trapping contaminated air inside. Yet, Catherine's tragedy was only part of the story. While her pregnancies failed before life could take hold, Tudor male heirs faced a different fate. A chilling pattern emerged: boys who survived childhood only to die of respiratory collapse in adolescence. 3 princes, born to different mothers under different conditions, would meet eerily similar ends. The first was Arthur, Prince of Wales. Born in 1486, Arthur was England's golden promise. His upbringing was meticulously crafted. He received the finest education, trained in diplomacy and governance, prepared from birth to rule. By 15, he was already conducting official correspondence. England's future seemed secure. That future ended in April 1502. Arthur had married Catherine of Aragon only months earlier in a spectacular ceremony. The young couple travelled to Ludlow Castle, Arthur's seat as Prince of Wales. The castle was cold, damp, and isolated. That spring, sweating sickness swept through the region, an illness that killed with terrifying speed. Both Arthur and Catherine fell ill. Catherine survived. Arthur did not. At just 15 years old, he died of what was described as fever and respiratory failure. Whether sweating sickness alone killed him, or whether tuberculosis had already weakened his lungs, remains debated. What mattered was the result. The heir was gone. His death reshaped everything. Catherine became a widow at 16. Henry, Arthur's younger brother, became the new heir, and a shadow settled over Tudor males, one that would return again and again, each time stealing a prince just as he approached manhood. Henry, the younger brother, became heir by default. Catherine of Aragon, widowed at 16, became both essential and dangerous. A woman whose womb might still secure the succession, or doom it entirely. For years after Catherine's final stillbirth, Henry VIII lived with a single, terrifying reality. He had no surviving son. Princess Mary existed, but daughters were considered unstable solutions, vulnerable to rebellion, marriage politics, and foreign influence. England demanded a male heir. Henry demanded one. When Catherine could no longer provide it, Henry found proof elsewhere. Her name was Bessie Blount, one of Catherine's own ladies-in-waiting. Young, healthy, and fertile, she gave Henry what his queen could not. In June 1519, she delivered a strong baby boy. The king was euphoric. This child proved Henry could father sons. The problem, in his mind, was Catherine. The boy was named Henry Fitzroy, literally son of the king. Henry made no effort to hide him. At just 6 years old, Fitzroy was created Duke of Richmond and Somerset, granted titles that placed him above every nobleman in England. Fitzroy grew into everything the Tudor dynasty needed. Intelligent, athletic, charismatic, he governed in the north, holding court in Yorkshire as a living symbol of royal authority. For 17 years, he thrived. Some whispered that Henry might legitimize him, bypassing tradition to secure the succession. Then, in the summer of 1536, the pattern returned. Only weeks earlier, Fitzroy had attended the execution of Anne Boleyn at the Tower of London. He showed no signs of illness. He was strong, confident, apparently immune to the decay that had stalked his family. 2 months later, he collapsed. In early July, Fitzroy fell suddenly ill. The symptoms appeared almost overnight: a violent, persistent cough, crushing fatigue, shortness of breath, that worsened by the day. Within a week, he was bedridden at St. James's Palace. The royal physicians recognized the signs immediately. Tuberculosis usually took months or years to kill. Fitzroy deteriorated in weeks, his lungs filled with infection. Breathing became agony. By July 22 or 23, records disagree, he was dead at 17 years old. Henry VIII was devastated and furious. Fitzroy's body was removed in secrecy, transported at night in a covered cart to Thetford Priory. There would be no public funeral, no ceremony. Some historians believe Henry suspected poison given the timing after Anne Boleyn's fall, but the symptoms told a different story. This was the same disease that had likely weakened Arthur decades earlier. 2 Tudor males, 2 deaths by respiratory failure, both healthy until suddenly they were not. 1 male heir remained. Edward, Henry's long-awaited legitimate son, was born in October 1537 to Jane Seymour. His arrival cost his mother her life. Jane died of postpartum infection 12 days after delivery. The boy was immediately placed under even stricter controls than those that had failed before. This child would survive. He had to. From the beginning, however, something was wrong. At age 4, a German diplomat described Edward as frail and unhealthy, doubting he would live long. The court ignored the observation, but those who saw the boy daily knew the truth. Edward was pale, small, prone to fevers. He lacked the robust presence expected of England's future king. In 1541, Edward suffered his first major illness, malaria. Physicians placed him on restrictive diets to strengthen his body. Nothing worked. He remained delicate, vulnerable to coughs and infections that other children shrugged off. Still, he reached adolescence. By 14, Edward showed sharp intelligence and a serious temperament. Then, in April 1552, disaster struck again. Edward contracted measles during an outbreak in London. For most teenagers, the disease was survivable. For Edward, it was catastrophic. Fever consumed him for weeks. The illness devastated his immune system, leaving him defenseless against future infection. 9 months later, in January 1553, Edward developed a new cough. This one was different. Wet, painful, relentless. Chest pain accompanied every breath. The physicians understood immediately. The same disease that had killed Arthur and Fitzroy was now consuming the king. Edward's decline was horrifyingly rapid. Thick sputum filled his lungs, greenish-yellow streaked with black and blood. Each coughing fit left him gasping, terrified of drowning in his own fluids. By spring 1553, his body began collapsing entirely. His legs swelled grotesquely with fluid, ulcers opened across his skin, and refused to heal. His immune system, destroyed by measles and tuberculosis, could no longer perform even basic functions. Fever burned constantly. He drifted between delirium and clarity. During his lucid moments, Edward worked desperately on his will, attempting to exclude his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth in favour of Protestant heirs. On July 6, 1553, Edward VI died at Greenwich Palace. He was 15 years old, the exact age Arthur had been when he died 51 years earlier. The autopsy revealed lungs riddled with massive blackened ulcers. Functional lung tissue was minimal. Edward had been suffocating slowly for months as his lungs decayed inside his chest. 3 Tudor males, 3 deaths between 15 and 17. 3 failures of breath. The pattern was complete. With Edward VI's death, the Tudor dream of a stable male succession collapsed entirely. The question remained, why did Tudor male heir die like this? The answer was not simple, and it was not singular. Tuberculosis alone stalked the Tudor family relentlessly. But tuberculosis was not the only killer. Sweating sickness haunted Tudor England like no other disease. It arrived without warning and killed with terrifying speed. A man could wake healthy and be dead by nightfall. It showed a disturbing preference for young, wealthy men. Noble sons died while the elderly poor sometimes survived. Yet even sweating sickness could not explain the precise pattern that haunted Tudor male heirs. Modern historians have proposed an explanation Tudor physicians could never have imagined: genetics. The deaths of Arthur, Fitzroy, and Edward follow a pattern too exact to ignore. All died between 15 and 17. All suffered respiratory collapse. All declined rapidly once illness began. One possible explanation is cystic fibrosis, or a similar genetic disorder. Such conditions cause thick mucus to accumulate in the lungs, creating ideal conditions for infection. Victims can appear healthy for years, then one illness triggers catastrophic decline. Genetic disease would also explain why isolation failed. Henry VIII himself may have carried dangerous genes. Modern researchers have identified possible mutations related to the Kell blood group, which could explain the immune incompatibility that killed Catherine of Aragon's children. Eltham Palace, with its great moat and polished halls, symbolized the illusion of control. It kept out visible threats, but could not stop invisible ones: bacteria, viruses, genetic flaws. Behind that moat, death waited patiently. It took Edmund at 16 months. It took baby Catherine at 9 days. It took Arthur at 15. Fitzroy at 17. Edward at 15. It took 5 of Catherine of Aragon's children before they could truly live. The Tudor nursery was not a sanctuary. It was a graveyard dressed in gold, where half the children sent there for protection never emerged alive, and all the power in England could not change that.